as you can see on my screen first, we will be reviewing session 5, that in it we discuss semiotics and symbolism in the interior castle, and the introduction to the seventh mention, what it includes, the seventh mention, and how it is divided into 2 stages, the active recollection and the passive recollection. The active recollection is where we practice the ascetical prayers. Next, we'll be discussing today something called the locution. The locutions are private revelation from God that is helpful for the soul to grow and mature and to be in union and listen to the voice of God in her life. And we will be discussing also the first mention. We'll be entering into and discussing and identifying the first mention and how the state of the soul in it. And we will be talking that entering the first mention through the practice of prayer, the soul needs to spend time in the room of the self-knowledge and humility. The door to enter into God's presence, it's prayers, meditation, and contemplation. This is how Saint Therese defined the spiritual journey. In the first mention, we do the effort to enter into this castle through prayers, meditation, and contemplation. Before I start discussing the locution, I would like to review with you in short what are the seventh mention. I mentioned that the first 3 mentions is where we practice the active recollection. The active recollection means when we gather all our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell. We could put scented candle and we can put incense. When we want to enter into the mood of prayer, these all things helps us to enter into the mood of prayer. It's very important to choose the right place and the right time. All these things together motivate us and help us to enter into the mood of prayer and help our senses to be attentive to God's presence. And if we are distracted, all saints, especially Saint Therese and Saint Ignatius, says that it's okay to be distracted. The important that you don't feel guilty about it. Resume praying without thinking about why you were distracted. So these are the first 3 mentions, is where we practice the active recollection. We do the effort to be in the presence of the Lord. The other 4 mention, it's called the spiritual journey there. It's called the passive recollection, or it means at that moment we don't need to do lots of effort to feel God's presence and to enter into the mood of prayers, because we are programmed, or we got used to entering, gathering, recollecting our senses and entering into God's presence. At that moment, we don't need lots of effort. It's like if we are watering the garden, Saint Therese speaks about it in the first 3 mentioned. We have to do the effort to get water, to water the garden so the fruit will grow. While in the passive recollection, it rains. You don't do any effort. Okay? So this is what we discussed last time. In the last 4 mentions, there, the soul, it's like, you remember when I spoke the semiotics about the silkworm? The silkworm, at that moment, in the 4th mention, it started to build its cocoon, and it's inside of the cocoon. She's no longer, her senses is no longer exposed to the worldly stuff. Instead, she built this wall to be only in God's presence. And this presence, through prayer and passive recollection and the prayer of peace, she's gonna feel God's presence, feel God talking to her, and this is gonna transform her into the beautiful butterfly. Okay? So now we're gonna start by today's session. We'll be discussing the locutions, as I mentioned. The locution, along with visions, they are the extraordinary mystical forms most frequent in Teresa's life. In elocution, one hears or listens to what another says. There is then one who speaks and one who listens or hears. God speaks, Teresa listens or hears. Locutions are divided according to Teresa into three categories: into bodily, formed in the external sense, as in the case of person who hears with his ears. Imaginative, it's formed in the internal sense of imagination, as the case of a person who gradually composes. And the intellectual locutions, or purely spiritual, is the word takes place in the most intimate depth. The intellectual ones are the clearest of the locutions, so clear that the soul remembers every syllable. With these words, there is often given much more to understand than is ever dreamed possible without words. But no matter where they are experienced, when they come from God, they first of all bear a great power and authority, for they then affect what they say. Secondly, when from God, they also leave an effect of quiet and peace and the readiness to engage in praises of God. Okay, let's continue the third locution. Third, when from God, they remain in the memory for a long time, and some are not forgotten. In the beginning, Teresa showed herself very fearful of these experiences, but with much caution. As time went on, she became more favorable toward this whole range of experiences and thankful to God for them, recognizing in them their concrete sanctifying power, although they should never be desired. In short, an interior locution is heard clearly in the heart through, though not a word is spoken. This is especially the third one. So, the locution is a form of a private revelation, but is distinct from an apparition or religious vision. An interior locution may be defined as a supernatural communication to the ear, imagination, or directly to the intellect. Today, after we spoke about the locution, we will be discussing the first dwelling places. The first dwelling places is divided into two chapters. You have chapter 1, chapter 2 in the book. I'm going to read the summary of each chapter, what Saint Therese speaks about every chapter. I encourage you, if you have the time after we finish the session, if you can, I will send you by email, or I can send you on the chat the book of the Interior Castle that is on YouTube, that is free. You can listen to it, like Saint Therese is telling you this, reading the book for you and explaining what's going on. It's very nice, and you can get the book and read it if you like to. Okay, with chapter 1, it discusses the beauty and dignity of our souls, draw a comparison in order to explain, and speaks of the benefit that comes from understanding this truth and knowing about the favors we receive from God, and how the door to the castle is prayer. So, in short, Saint Therese, when she speaks in chapter 1, she describes being made on the image and likeness of God. We are beautiful and we have the dignity. Second chapter treats of how ugly a soul is when in mortal sin, and how God wanted to let a certain person know something about this. It discusses also some matters on the theme of self-knowledge. This chapter is beneficial for there are noteworthy points. Explain what is meant by these dwelling places. So the second chapter, it describes the soul that when it's in mortal sin, how it loses its beauty because she's made on the image and likeness of God, and she becomes very ugly. And Saint Therese discussed that God wanted her to know this. She knew a person that God wanted to reveal this to this person. However, it's commonly known that this person is her. She didn't want to disclose this, as I mentioned. However, one of her confessors mentioned that Jesus spoke to her and explained to her the spiritual journey. She also highlight that and emphasize how important it is to spend time in self-knowledge room. This chapter is beneficial and very helpful. So, in short, I'm gonna explain to you what when Saint Therese speaks about that we need to spend time in the room of self-knowledge in the first mention. We spoke about that at the beginning of the first or the second session when we spoke about the soul, how she, because of the original sin, has weakness, has the weakness. The term used in theology is called concupiscence, which means she has the soul has the person has tendency to do wrong, not to do good. This is why we need the sacrament, the confession that heals us, strengthens us to sustain ourselves in the spiritual journey. And she speaks about also how ugly the soul is when she loses the glory of God and the grace of God and the image of God through the mortal sin. And how much the soul is called to be attentive, not to expose herself to sin or to temptation because of this weakness, and to learn how to discern how the evil spirit work to hinder her from being into God's presence and in the process of transformation. Okay. In more detail, we're going to read some things about the first chapter. Saint Therese mentioned His Majesty in saying that the soul is made in his own image makes it also impossible for us to understand the sublime dignity and beauty of the soul. It is a shame and unfortunate that through our own fault we don't understand ourselves or know who we are. Saint Therese says, wouldn't it show great ignorance, my daughters, if someone, when asked who he was, didn't know, and didn't know his father or mother or from what country he came? Well, now, if this would be so extremely stupid, we are incomparably more so when we do not strive to know who we are, but limit ourselves to considering only roughly these bodies. We seldom consider the precious thing that can be found in the soul or who dwells within it, or its value. So, consequently, little effort is made to preserve its beauty. All our attention is taken up with the plainness of the diamond setting or the outer wall of the castle that is with these bodies of ours. Okay. So, in short, chapter 1, it's important to mention that we are not we need to understand who we are. We are not only a body, we are also a soul, and we are called to sustain our soul the way we sustain our body and more, because our body is mortal but our soul is immortal. Saint Therese states, souls who do not practice prayer are like people with paralyzed or crippled bodies. Even though they have hands and feet, they cannot give order to these hands and these feet. Thus, there are so ill and so accustomed to being involved in external matters that there is no remedy, nor does it seem they can enter within themselves. So, insofar as I can understand the door of entry to this castle is prayer and reflection, I don't mean to refer to mental more than vocal prayer. For since vocal prayer is prayer, it must be accompanied by reflection. A prayer in which a person is not aware of whom he is speaking to, what he is asking, who is asking, and whom, I do not call prayer, however much than lips move. In short, it's very important to know that I need to know, even if I'm praying vocal prayer, the important that I listen and reflect on what I'm praying and to whom I'm praying, and to pray from my as much as I can attentively and with all my heart. If I am distracted or unable to focus, or it's different than being passing through spiritual dryness, then I don't want to pray. I have to pray, and I'm not doing it because I want to pray. Ask for the desire of the Saint Ignatius call it the desire of the desire. I can pray and ask God to give me the strength and the will and the desire to pray. It's acceptable to be this way too. Next, the beauty and the dignity of of our soul. Saint laments that we attend more to our bodies than to our souls. In the castle that is our soul, there are many dwelling places, and in the center is the place where secret exchange between God and the soul take place. Teresa states her purpose in writing to explain the various favors God grants to souls. She thinks we should know about these favors, even if we don't receive them ourselves. If we don't receive such favors, we should be happy for those who do. She thinks we should know, yeah, I mentioned this, in giving these gifts. So we should praise God's wonderful goodness in giving these gifts. Those who do not believe in these favors will have no experience of them, for God doesn't like us to put a limit on his works. Some people may reach out to God and be united with him through more than prayers by deeds. Their love and service to their family is very important. However, we need to praise the Lord for every gift he gives to every soul. And it's important, as Teresa says, that it's important that we get to know these kind of things. One day God will grant it to us in a way or in another too. And in the first chapter, Teresa clarifies and makes a distinction between two types of souls who have not yet entered the castle. This is a type of souls. And the most impaired, those who have focused on external matter to such as an extent that they have completely neglected prayer and the interior life, can no longer do anything to help themselves change. They need help from the Lord himself. She says she is not writing for such persons. Instead, she addresses her work to persons who, though involved in the world, have good desires and make occasional effort at prayer. They eventually enter the first lower rooms of the castle, but so many reptiles, worldly concerns enter with them that they cannot appreciate the castle yet. What does the church says about about what we just spoke? The Catechism of the Catholic Church speaks in this same vein. Being in the image of God, the human individual possesses the dignity of a person who is not just something but someone. He is capable of self-knowledge, of self-possession, and of freely giving himself and entering into communion with other persons. And he is called by grace to a covenant with his creator, to offer him a response of faith and love that no other creature can give in his stead. In explaining that we are made in the image and likeness of God, Teresa points out how we have a capacity for God that transcends the human person. Not only are called to communion with God, but we are structured in such a way that God lives in his own dwelling place within us, more so than he does in the whole cosmos. Ultimately, what I need to remind you that the soul also being made on the image and likeness of God, this image, Teresa says that it's biblical too. Okay, and God is present in it. There is in the book of the ways of perfection, Teresa explains in detail how to enter into this type of prayer and the way of it's in chapter 28 and 29. You can get back to it and read it if you are interested.